Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us on Friday. So my name's Alex Hardy. So obviously I'm sharing my screen right now, and who you will notice missing is Professor Yates, who is unfortunately unwell today, so he can't join us. But we'll be explaining the project as best we can, and as Suzanne said, I will give an overview of the project, what we've been working on, and then Suzanne will go into some of the findings from some of our analysis thus far. So first things first, we're part of the Defence Data Research Centre, which you can obviously see displayed on the screen, or hopefully you can. You can see a bunch of the logos, so these are the different people that we work with. So myself, I'm based at the University of Liverpool, Suzanne, University of Exeter. We work closely with our DSTL partners. Our research is funded by the Ministry of Defence, and then we also work closely with colleagues at the University of Surrey, Dake, and Digital Catapult, who have all been involved in some degree or another with the research. Either they participated in the workshops or have been involved in various different research design stages. So that's who we are.
Alex, it says the slides are not showing.
Oh. Okay, we'll try that again.
Maybe do the full screen share.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do this. How about now?
Oh, okay. Eleanor could see the slide, so
yeah, I think the other one might have
okay.
slightly less stuff around it because you'll get the Microsoft Teams bit up here in the top left and my cursor if I do the full screen, right? Whereas if I just share the window, it should just be should in theory just be the presentation slides, but
and somebody has their hand up. Nadia, did you want to say something? Oh, it was a mistake putting her hand up. Okay, Alex, go ahead.
Okay, then. No problem. Okay, I'll just carry on from here, and if we have other issues with the slides, please do speak up. So yeah, that's who we work with. Now, specifically, myself and Suzanne work on a work stream called Attitudes to Data. So this is led by the University of Liverpool, but we all work collaboratively. And this kind of addresses some of the socio-technical aspects of our project. So the various different universities work on different work streams within the wider Defence Data Research Centre, and we are very much looking at the attitudes to data within British organisations. I will talk about some of the other stuff that we're doing later at the presentation. Today, we just want to talk about the workshops that we have been running, that we ran now because they are all complete. They were completed in 2023, just before Christmas. Which involve the use of Lego, as you can see on the screen. This is a terrible working title, but this is some of the key issues that we found were around access, security, risk, and organizational processes. So a slightly jazzier title needed for some of these reports, but that's where we're at right now. So to give you an overview of what we actually did for these for these workshops. So we conducted 33 workshops across the UK. I'm not going to read everything that's on the screen there. And we aim to sort of have a nice geographical spread of where we engaged people. We sourced participants for these workshops in a number of ways, ranging from just approaching who we felt were appropriate sources, along with snowball techniques of using existing contacts, people we worked with, public and private sector organizations. And broadly, our workshops, they consisted of a 90-minute session, sometimes slightly shorter, sometimes slightly longer, depending on how they were going. So there's a certain amount of flexibility in our method. Each workshop involves a warm-up and introductory activity. The main part of the workshop is a 45-minute group activity, again, based around Lego and using Lego models to get participants to build their relationship with data in their organization. So as part of that exercise, every team was given a framing question and then a series of challenges for things that they could build, and these varied slightly between the teams. A point of note, so while our workshops were designed for ideally 8 participants, we had a flexibility so that there were some that had up to 10, and then there was no minimum as well. So there were some very small workshops as well. And this is for a number of reasons based around practicality of getting people to participate in workshops. You get things like last minute dropouts. You also, if you tell a workplace, oh, ideally it's for 10 and then they have a couple of extra willing participants, you don't want to turn them away. So you make things do. So yeah, anywhere between 10 right down to an individual completing a workshop. Our ideal setup in the research design for this was 2 groups of 4 who then present the findings to one another, and we would give them slightly different challenge questions within those groups, so they kind of create an interesting discussion, and it's sort of value added for the participants then as well. So they get to ask, oh, what question did you have, and then discuss the different findings that they had between themselves. And I didn't want to give a list of all of the research questions that they had. In fact, I didn't want to give the whole questions because some of them were quite long because this was a long workshop. But I've just provided some of them in brief there. So times when people found data convenient or inconvenient to access, whether it was difficult to access critical data, instances when data has been compromised, concerns around access were just some of the general themes that we explored within these workshops. So the way that we collected our data then, participants build their models, and then they explain what they've built. So that our data is primarily in their explanations. We took a lot of photographs as well. Right now, they're pretty much supplementary, which is nice, of course, when writing reports and papers, because you've got like a visual memento of what they spoke of as well, but we haven't really done any visual analyses on these right now. They're kind of being used in a supplementary way. So we recorded and transcribed the explanations of what was built. And then we coded this using some software called Atlas TI, analyzing it for different themes. And Suzanne will talk a lot more about some of the analyses that she's been doing as well on this. I will talk about some of the qualitative stuff that I have done as well, so we've got a bit of qualitative and quantitative work going on. And then just to briefly mention some of the ethics. So participants are anonymized, and workplaces, so they're obscured. So with general kind of descriptions, so we'll have public sector. We haven't obscured DSTL thus far, because they are funding our research. However, individuals are completely anonymized. We've assigned generic categories, and there's the list of the categories on the screen there. So we've got public sector, DSTL. The other groups that we engaged with were consultants, non-profit, higher education, some pensioners, and some small medium enterprises as well. So that's the workshops in a nutshell. And this is some of the very sort of basic analysis. So when we have transcribed this, we've then gone and coded the work. And these are some of the top 10 most common codes, less things like housekeeping codes within our data. So what you can see here is sort of the emergence of the key questions. And some of these make sense because the questions were framed around it, of course. But not this isn't exact. So the most commonly discussed issue is processes, policies, and practices. We've got accessibility, data security, organizational issues, and risk being the top 5 there. What we then look at is the co-occurrence of these codes. So this is the top 10 again from this previous slide here. And what this table shows is how commonly those related to one another. So you can kind of see in the darker colors, those are the most common co-occurrences. So the very darkest one is the most common. So organizational issues and processes, policies, and practices was the most common co-occurrence of those 2 codes. So it means that people talked about those 2 issues together the most often. You've then got other common ones, which again, some of these might be expected. So data security and risk, it's logical that people would talk about those two things, but worthy of discussion nonetheless. We've got accessibility and security issues and the balance between access and security. And which is the other most common one, which I feel like I am missing. 45, 52, 75. Okay, we have a data security and data integrity was the fifth most common. And then you can kind of make all various different visualizations with the codes that we have assigned to this data. Again, some of this is still a work in progress. What you can see here on the right side, this is called a Sankey diagram. These are the top 5 codes on the right. And then you can kind of see the flow of various smaller codes and different ideas into those bigger ideas left to right. So for example, you can see when people were talking about application and system in the top left, and then you can see where that then flows into different ideas. So the thickest bar there will be going into organizational. Obviously, what you can also see here is there's a lot going on. Data is complicated, it's multifaceted, so there's very rarely a very neat kind of one idea feeding into another. So like, for example, what you can see if you just look at risk in the top right corner, there are so many different things flowing into what people talk about when they talk about risk, and it's related to all of these things on the left. And there are some minor codes that aren't even fully visible on here. You can kind of see tiny little lines, but it only makes the labels available to the more visible codes. So there's a lot going on. People talk about these big issues and related to a lot of different things, and we try to unpick that in some of our discussion in our reports. Other sort of things you can do with Atlas TI, word clouds, and again, I think what's interesting here is it puts the most common themes in the middle. Just in terms of security and data access, that co-occurrence, what we have most commonly discussed are people and data smack in the middle. Things as well, but commonly people, data, central to what we're talking about. And it kind of sort of explains some of the socio-technical approach that we're taking as well. And then it's just kind of to share at this point some of the things that we have seen. So at the moment, we're writing up some various different reports. I've just completed a report kind of giving an overview of the workshops with, again, the broad overview of these key themes. So this particular theme was when people were talking about organizational issues and then processes and practices. So what I've done is picked out in the report an instance where this was being talked about and the photo that goes with it, which has annoyingly on the slide become slightly blurry, so you can't really read what the participants have written on their post-it notes. However, I can tell you that one of the ones on the tower is that people on high really don't get data. So this was talking about an issue that they felt like senior management within this particular organization really didn't understand data. They didn't really understand the challenges faced by workers within that organization. And there was frustration about that. And that was expressed in discussion, but also within the physical model that they built as well. In terms of processes and policies and practices, and then access, here we have another workshop image where we have a man sort of on the left of our screen here with his head's on fire. And this was to express frustration, trying to make data accessible for a customer. So the customers were pictured on the other side of the wall, and the wall was there to symbolize frustration, but also the frustration of the research participant who couldn't share the data that he needed to with a customer. And then here, this was security and risk. This often led to a lot of fun visualization. So within the Lego sets, there's all kinds of things like skulls and scary kind of things, which of course had been used here. So there's an evil skeleton man. He's to visualize a hostile actor. This is a common occurrence as well. People use the colors of the Russian flag to symbolize a hostile actor as well. We also had things like fishing rods, which you can see the skeleton man is using here with a fish on the end of it, to symbolize a phishing attack by a perceived hostile actor. But yeah, lots of interesting imagery around that and discussion about who those risks were. Just to pick out some of that security and risk relationship, that is also horribly blurred. So I'm going to talk you through that one because you're not going to be able to read it. So data security and risk are the codes on the right there. And some of the key issues that fed into that were threat, security, personal data, leaks and breaches, hackers and hostile actors, and fraud. So for example, what you see with fraud is that overwhelmingly feeds into data security, whereas it was less discussed in the form of risk. Hackers and hostile actors, again, kind of dispersed within both, although more discussion on data security, but this also makes sense somewhat because data security was more frequently mentioned. And to briefly give an overview, because I am on limited time now, my 20 minutes is approaching and we want to leave lots of time for questions at the end. So in terms of the report that I had just written, one of the key reflections is that data is complicated. It's a key challenge for UK organisations. That's not novel in itself. It's in every data policy document that you can find. But that is something that has come through within our workshops. So yeah, 33 held across the UK, engaging in I can't remember the exact number of participants, but it is a lot. So it's a good thing in the sense that the policy does reflect some common concerns of workers within organisations across the UK. Access, common concern. So frustrations with policies, processes, and practices. However, it's important to note that some of these concerns are also tempered by understanding. So people understand that there's security requirements, and that's why the policies and processes and practices exist. There are risks that we need to mitigate against, which is sometimes why access is a challenge. So people did often speak with frustration, but then sometimes with understanding of that challenge as well. So it is nuanced. It's not just, oh, I can't access my data, this is a disaster. There was general understanding, broadly speaking, but not in every situation. This is why it's important that we're going to drill down on that later. And we'll do things like sectoral analyses as well. Suzanne will talk about some of her research to build upon this as well. We overall think that creative methods were a success in getting people to talk about some of these socio-technical problems. Great because obviously there's people within the Lego sets as well as building blocks, so you can build abstract things, but also people. We do have a slight caveat in some of these findings. The type of people we have engaged with, I think, would be described as digital professionals. So everybody in these groups works with technology. They have a high level of digital literacy. They generally understand what they're doing. Now, this is particularly interesting because some of the research being done elsewhere and by Professor Yates, who is unfortunately not here today. He would be able to speak in much more detail about this than I can. But to take a figure from his recent research on a minimum digital living standard in the UK, 59% of the wider UK workforce lacks basic digital skills as per the UK government's own definition. So we haven't necessarily engaged with that 59% in this research. It is something that we're aware of, and sometime, and perhaps in the future, we may look to engage with different groups to gain some understanding of that as well. So these findings are important. They're important because these organisations are important to the UK's wider digital data strategy. However, we do also understand that this is not speaking necessarily for the entire population, because there is a large group of the UK workforce that this research doesn't access. So future studies may do that. That's sort of beyond the scope of this particular study. We do also hope to engage with individuals more specifically within the defense community. So there's going to be a follow-up to this as well. So this is kind of building a baseline, engaging with the wider UK working population. We hope to then engage with individuals within defense to build upon this, and then we can do all kinds of comparisons going forward as well. So that is a work. It's not in progress yet, but it is planned for the near future. And then to just very quickly talk about some of the other stuff that we're doing as well. So I did mention that what we're trying to do right now is build a baseline with the wider UK population. The workshops are part of that, and the other aspect of that is a national survey, which I believe must be nearly complete. Not sure what the exact date the data collection ends on that. I don't know if you know, Suzanne. It's very soon. Yeah, so it's being conducted by our partner company called Critical. So we put together a nationally representative survey of workforce knowledge and attitudes to data, particularly AI and analytics in the UK. Yeah, we want to reduce barriers, and we need to know more about this in the wider workforce. So while the workshops, as I say, they touch upon a specific group of people who we might describe as digital professionals, this is going to be representative of 5,000 UK working adults. So this should be more representative of that wider population that I mentioned before. While the questionnaire is far too long for me to go through in any great detail right now, you can see a little sample of it on your screen there, and also the routing. So in the bottom right of the slide, this is the routing that participants take when they take this. So we gather their basic demographics, and then we quiz them on their basic digital skills. We then explore their awareness of AI and data analytics, and depending on how they answer questions, they go and answer questions on their awareness of artificial intelligence or data analytics in more detail. If they don't have that awareness, they get more general digital technology questions. It comes back to digital workplace questions, and then some questions about society as well, more generally, and the use of technology within it. So there's some example questions, and again, participants have to select one of those options depending on how strongly they agree or disagree. We'll then run a lot of analysis on that when we finally get that done. But we should have that data sometime soon. I want to say it's the end of this month. So it may even be the last day today, Critical are collecting, but I'm not sure off the top of my head. But that's that for now, and I'm slightly aware that I have run slightly over time, so I will pass to my colleague, Suzanne. Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Alex, for the overview. I will go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see that?
I can't see anything yet.
I can't see anything yet. Okay, let's try again. Let me share my screen. How about now?
Yeah, can see that.
Okay. And it's still good then. Okay.
That's perfect.
So as Alex said, we're a multidisciplinary team, and my background is computational linguistics. And what I'm going to present to you are research findings based upon 3 different software packages that we've used to analyze the data. As Alex said, there were 33 workshops that we conducted. And from that, we edited those transcripts, and we ended up with 125,000 words, a little over 125,000 words. And then this is the distribution or word count by sector, and that matters with the computational linguistic software. You need to pay attention to the word count. So this is actually of the 125,000 words, for example, government comprises 25% of it, and the least is consultants. So we did get a nice mix across the 6 sectors that we're focusing on. To confirm that we were getting people to talk about attitudes towards data, I used a software package called Sketch Engine and compared that to the British National Corpus of Spoken English. And what that software does is says, here are the top 25 words, content words, that are not in the British National Corpus or that are key compared to the British National Corpus. And all of these words, all 25 of them, have to do with what we're researching, attitudes surrounding data, security, data, technology, organizational issues, governance, and so on. So this was a confirmation that we did get people to talk about what we were hoping they would talk about by building Lego models. The second software package I used is out of University of Lancaster, and it's called W Matrix. And what W Matrix does is you feed through the data set, the 125,000 words, and it tags every word for its part of speech, but also for its semantic meaning. So this is based upon 25 or 21 high-level semantic domains or categories. So I went in and said, well, what were the top emotive words? And so it's like, you can see where it says E for emotion. So you go in and you say, what were the most frequent or the highest number of emotive words? And these were the top 3 categories: angry, discontent, and worry. And then what you do is you say, well, what are the most frequent words within those categories? So for angry, it was threat, attack, angry, annoy, and malicious. Discontent, the only word that frequently occurred was frustrate or derivations of the word frustrate. And then the worry category was concern, worry, insecure, and care. So all of this is quantitative and numerical, and it's not subjective. And then what we have to do is we have to go in and say, what are the stories around these words? So around angry, let me go back a minute, around angry, threat, annoy, attack, malicious. What are the stories that the participants in the workshops talking about? And on the left-hand side, you'll see that they're talking a lot about data and then organizational processes. And in the second column, you'll see that they're talking about technological issues. Now, when you read the stories, you also realize it's not just anger. What they're talking about are perceived risk. And I think that's why there's so many technology issues there. There's perceived risk with VPNs and firewalls. There's perceived risk with the cloud and external threats. And so the breakdown by sector for these words, where the government and universities most often use words associated with anger or perceived risk, and enterprises, the enterprise sector didn't. Now, the enterprise sector is made up of small and medium organizations, also retired people and sole proprietors. So their perceived risk aren't as, I'm not going to say as large, but they don't have the technology that the universities and the government have. So less perceived risk with technology for the enterprise sector. Discontent, this was, as Alex mentioned in his as well, frustration. But when you look at the stories around frustration, they're manifested as barriers to success. So the largest sector that spoke about barriers to success is the government sector. University, not so much, maybe because universities are highly regulated, although the government as well. But I can't explain the difference, but university and government are the two extremes for discontent and barriers to success. And again, we find issues with data and then organizational issues and a few issues with technology being a barrier to success. In the worry category, it's not just worry, it is concerns, but it's also perceived risk as well. So we have concern and perceived risk regarding data, as well as technology and organizational issues like compliance to GDPR, training on employee training on applications. And the sector with the most discussions concerning perceived risk was the nonprofit sector. And then when we looked at those, we found that there were 3 main themes. These concerns, these perceived risks, these barriers to success, anger, they mostly were centered on data, technology, and organizations. So if we look at the top concerns, most of these data concerns are a worry, more than being angry about the data concerned or discontent with data concerns. People are worried about it, accessing untrustworthy data, the confidentiality of data, the security of legacy data and cloud data. So data concerns were mostly expressed as perceived risk and worry. Technology concerns, though, as you can well imagine, are more along the lines of this anger or perceived risk. So attacks, external threats, phishing, viruses, and so on. The VPN and firewall, For some people, it's a barrier to success. We heard quite often that in hybrid working, the VPN caused issues, caused downtime. So this would be like a barrier to success, to getting the work done on a given day. And then the organizational concerns mostly have to do with barriers to success. So these are roadblocks. These are issues that are preventing people from perhaps getting their work done in the manner that they'd like to. Not a lot of anger or worry with organization, except for lack of internal processes and procedures. And this is a common theme. Alex has mentioned it throughout our workshop. Processes, procedures, and policies are really an issue. And then using the W matrix software, not looking at emotive categories, what were the main themes? And two of them were prevalent: obligation or necessity. The words surrounding that theme or belonging to that theme are need, should, necessarily, essential, and must. Positive evaluation: trustworthy, good, great, brilliant, perfect, and ideal. And what's interesting, and it's good from a linguistic perspective, is that these words and these stories were almost distributed equally by sector. So everybody was expressing these words in almost an equal balance. And again, we have to go in and then say, well, what is the story that they're talking about when they're using these words? What's the context? What's the message? What's the theme? And for obligation or necessity, we find four main themes: organizational, technology, employees, and data. So employees and organizational are the most prevalent here. Accountability, progression and development, training, and all of those stories, again, surround these words: need, should, necessarily, essential, and must. And then organizational, again, similar themes: collaboration and communication, standards and best practices, accreditation. Technology, not so much, as again, we don't see that in the emotive category as being high concern most of the time. And then when we look at positive evaluation, the stories surrounding trustworthy, good, great, better, brilliant, perfect, and ideal, mostly organizational. Investments in security, issues with knowledge management, screening of suppliers, sharing of tools and data. Again, technology is the least, but what's important in these stories is the cloud infrastructure, having a reliable VPN, efficient searches, and data management systems. And from this, we hope to, in the coming months, create a best practices or guidelines based upon these stories. And this is really an idealized version of the perfect environment surrounding data. And the third software that we used, Alex mentioned, was Atlas TI. Now, this isn't a quantitative software, it's a qualitative software package where Alex and I went through these transcripts, and you highlight a quote. It's a different amount of text. And what are the themes in that quote? What are they talking about? Are they talking about fraud and AI? And you can take a quote, it can be a phrase, sentences, a paragraph, and you can say, here's what we're talking about. So we did that, and then you come up with these set codes that we're now going to use. And we realized they fell into 6 main categories: data, organizational, organizations, risk, threat, society, and technology. So the number of codes, so this is Alex and I going through highlighting 3,651 instances of this is what they're talking about. So quite a big data set, quite reliable data. The least thing talked about was organizations, but these were like the NHS and big tech, but still significant, but the least. Again, as we've seen throughout this, the most important one, or the one most often spoke about, is data. So when we look at by sector, what are they talking about? Now, this is just a quantification of these codes. We see that data, once again, is the thing most often discussed. So we've used 3 different packages, software packages, to analyze our data set, and we're still coming up with the most significant issues around data, and then organization, and then sector. But it does, or technology, it does differ by sector. So for universities, their technology is a main concern, as well as the organizational policies, practices, and as well as data. And to the public sector, data was the most significant category. When we combine all of those, not sector, and this goes back to Alex's chart as well, what were the most critical issues that were discussed during the workshops? And what we see is the processes, policies, and practices. So no matter how we cut it, with a different software, we're coming up with the same things. These are the most critical issues to the people who participated in our workshop. Accessibility to data and data security are almost similar in the magnitude, as well as risk and organizational issues. Okay, so I think we're all back now, and I'm not sharing my screen, and we have a hand up. Do we have a hand up? As I mentioned at the beginning, Jade, our facilitator, is unable to, or she's having technological issues, so she is unable to facilitate this. So Alex and I will. So we are ready to answer any questions. Feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A, or you're welcome to raise your hand. Alex, was there anything you wanted to add to the qualitative and quantitative results?
Where to begin? Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to convey the amount of nuance that was in some of our findings because, yeah, I've done the overview stuff, and we're really just drilling down now. I'm struggling to add anything else. I'm happy to answer any questions at all, but key issues, I think
Andrew,
we're going to hand up.
Andrew, go ahead, Andrew. And if you want to put your camera on, feel free.
Does my camera work today? That's a good question. There we go. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you and we can see you.
Great. Just curious, did you get any surveys or findings from participants in the NHS? I noticed you briefly mentioned it at the end, and just nosy about that one.
So survey, we expect that there will be some participants from the NHS because it's a nationally representative survey. We don't have the results for that just yet. Suzanne, did you conduct any with the NHS? I didn't personally, but we did different workshops. So the way it worked was that we sort of split the geographical stuff. So I did kind of London and East Coast, and Suzanne did the West Coast. I didn't do any with the NHS specifically.
No, they showed up in the transcripts primarily in the enterprise sector, because and then in the pensioners as well. Mostly the discussions around the NHS involved the security of health records and transferring information, and all, the NHS is undergoing a lot of technological changes at the moment and implementing a lot of new systems. And so that was really the context of the NHS. So no, we did not go into the NHS and conduct workshops though. Thank you for the question.
Interesting, thank you.
I think it'd be really interesting to do it with the NHS.
Yeah. It would.
And you get fascinating models and different really specific examples. What they talk about, the method is absolutely transferable, I would say. It's just not what the sort of people we targeted here, but definitely for a future study, it would work. Yeah.
Yeah. And we have a question in the Q&A. Did the workshop discussion stop with this present, as in worries and frustration, or did any of them move on to the future and possible solutions? And I think because how we framed these 8 challenges, so each team had one of 8 challenges, and we typically let the organization pick which challenge was most applicable to the workshop participants. And the questions were like, as a team or working together, build a model of barriers to success in your organization as it pertains to data. So it was very much a present situation. Build a model in your organization based upon your experience with this topic. So nobody was saying, this would be the ideal. And I think that's what's interesting from the quantitative and qualitative research findings, is that we do feel that what they were saying can create an image for the future. It can create best practices for the future. It can create guidelines for the future by combining our research findings and really focusing on, okay, they talked about policies, processes, and procedures, but what about those? They talked about accessibility to data. What specifically were the issues with accessibility to data? So those will help us create an image of the future or an idealized environment surrounding data. But it did really focus on presently in your organization, what is happening. Would you like to add anything to that, Alex?
No, that totally echo that. So just from the way we framed the questions, that was kind of the results we got. But you could, of course, tweak our methodology in the future. Slightly different question where you get people to build a vision of the future, for example. You could do it. It's not kind of within the scope of our research design for this. But yeah, it's a really good question. It's a definite future study. But yeah, right now it's very much the here and now. What works, what doesn't work, what are you happy with, what, yeah.
And you did see in the research findings that the word ideal was a frequent word. So sometimes they would say in an ideal situation, but we also had a lot of negation. So we had to really carefully look at what they were saying. We couldn't just take the words. They would say, this is not an ideal situation. And then, well, what isn't an ideal situation? And then turn that into a more of a positive, yeah.
If you don't mind me popping on just to sort of
yeah, that's
Please
great.
do, yeah.
Thank you.
I think that's really, really interesting, because I think the impression that I'm getting is that lots of organizations are talking about the future. We're talking about where we want to get to, and perhaps delving into specific pieces of software which might or might not solve the panacea to all our problems, without necessarily spending enough time actually looking at the present. You know, what are the current concerns and worries and barriers? Because I think sometimes if you haven't identified those, you can't actually move on to the future appropriately because you don't know what the best fit is. So I think that's really, really interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think the survey will help as well, because we went into organizations, and now we have this survey of 5,000 people and hopefully we'll get similar results, and we'll analyze the information, and hopefully there will be parallels between the workshops and the survey that can then lead us to a best practices for the environment surrounding data, which, as we've seen, are going to focus on data itself, technology, organizational processes and procedures, and a little bit on the employees. Do you work in this area, Tabitha, that you could add anything to the discussion? You're on mute.
In a way, not really, in that I actually work in finance at the University of Exeter, but I have a family member who's been involved in the digital side of things, and it is, I think, something that I'm interested in from the point of view that I think that not only in the accountancy sector and finance is digital and finance sort of converging together, but just as finance is something that touches the aspect of all organizations, so is the digital world and data, and that's very much the world that we're sort of heading towards, you know, with the idea of big data and all of those sorts of things. So from my perspective, I come along to sort of see what's happening and sort of almost from a transdisciplinary point of view. So I probably can't add much, but yes.
Were the results surprising to you?
No, from the articles that I've read, that very much does tend to sort of fit in with what I'm hearing, and particularly the one that really made me smile was the people on high don't really get data. So,
Yeah, it's a good one.
That was a common theme in the workshops. There were lots of towers in the Lego models. And when we started this project and just telling people, even coworkers, we're going to get people to talk about data by building a Lego model. It seemed like such a foreign concept. Now, it is a methodology that's been around for decades. We didn't invent using Legos to get people to talk. That's been around for a long time. Lego Serious Play, Lego company has a common creative license for Lego Serious Play. They give you guides for conducting the workshop. So we didn't invent it, but it's still a bit of a foreign concept. But I think, even the sketch engine results really showed that we did get people to talk about data, technology, organizational issues surrounding data. Yeah, I think it was a successful methodology.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we could definitely also do this with other groups, whether it is the NHS, like we were discussing before. It may then be that we roll it out to some of the other groups that we perhaps didn't touch. A slight spoiler, and this is all I know about the data from the survey so far, which is just what Professor Yates has updated us, is that there is a fairly high proportion of don't knows in a lot of the questions regarding AI and data analytics in the workplace. And again, this is because this is a nationally representative survey as opposed to perhaps engaging with the kind of people that we did in the workshops. So yeah, there has apparently been quite a few don't knows. We don't have the data fully yet, but apparently that's expected, and it's also a finding within itself that not everybody is using this. So yeah, that'll be an interesting.
And there's so much talk about artificial intelligence, but I think that we only had 3 codes. So as Alex and I are going through and doing this qualitative coding in LSTI, I think we only have 3 codes associated with artificial intelligence. So in 33 workshops across 3 nations, Wales, Scotland, and England, they weren't talking about artificial intelligence. They were, talking about their frustrations and their worries and their perceived risk. And the thing about this Lego Serious Play is that the model they're building is based upon the challenge. So if we had given them different challenges, or Tabitha, as you said, if we gave them, or Alex said, a challenge for build the ideal data center of the future, or build the ideal data flows between the finance department and HR. That's the kind of model they would build. So it's really all in the challenges. And those are stem from our research questions.
Yeah. I don't know if you found this as well, Suzanne. What I found is particularly, so there was, we put the sets together for the Lego, and the pieces that went in were of our own design. And the general mentions of AI that I found when it did happen, it was fairly infrequent, as we can see in the coding, was people using the robot to build because they saw the robot and then thought, oh, I want to talk about that. But it was often like an abstract risk. I remember one workshop talking about how they were unsure about using ChatGPT with their work because it was a risk, because they didn't know where the data was going, etc., which is obviously legitimate. But sometimes it got thrown in as a token mention because people found the robot piece and thought, oh, that's artificial intelligence. So there's a certain amount of that comes with the research design and the pieces that we put in there as well. I wonder if you put more robot pieces in, whether more people would have talked about AI, for example. So you tweak the design slightly, you tweak the questions, the pieces that are in the Lego set, and maybe you get some slightly different results as well.
And we had a fish in there in the Lego set, and so many of the Lego models had that fish. And we do have a high occurrence of discussions around fishing. Now, as Alex said, if we didn't put the fish in there, would there be as many discussions? So I think we were objective. I don't think we were leading them. We left them alone for 45 minutes, did not give them any guidance really, except here's your challenge, work together and build this model. There's no right answers. But yeah, perhaps more robots would have been more AI discussions. No fish, less fishing discussions. Any other questions or comments? Appreciate that, Tabitha and Andrew. Well, if you don't already belong to our mailing list, DDRC is our website. We have a lot of blog posts. We have videos of our presentations. This is the second one Alex and I have given on our research. The other one is on there. We have a lot of articles on our team, healthcare issues, data management, data policies, attitudes towards data. Andrew works with synthetic data. So if you haven't, visit ddrc.uk and you can sign up for our newsletter and become aware of when these are offered. We do 2 a month at this point in time. The DDRC does 2 a month, 2 webinars a month. So.
And I think we're all over social media as well. So LinkedIn, Twitter, X. Yeah, so you can find us on there if you look for DDRC, or DDRC UK is the Twitter profile.